Every artist wants to be better at character design, but there is so much more going on here with each of these ideas, and it's not just the character designs themselves. In fact, you probably didn't even notice it. There is something in each of these designs that are so interconnected to the character that it becomes a part of them. I am talking about prop design. So where do we even start with prop design? How do we begin? How can we go from just mindlessly copying references to leveling up our designs to be epic and memorable? And most importantly, how can we make our designs fit in with our character? The good news is that anyone can achieve this, and it's actually much easier than you may think. So I'll be going over my process along with a few exercises on how I improved my prop design and how you can replicate this to fit any of your character designs. But before we dive in, we need to first know what prop design even is. It seems we hear a lot about character and background design, but props don't get as much attention. Is prop design about designing any kind of object in your world, or is it something that is related to a character? It can actually be both, but we're going to focus on our main prop for our character, known as a hero prop. This is the prop that your character will be using or interacting with the most. Other props outside of this role support the world building in terms of how the world looks and operates. These types of props can literally be anything. All of these props that we would dismiss as boring and uninteresting in our day-to-day lives can actually give a lot of weight and depth to the worlds our characters exist in. The props can also give the feel of the world. Look at these examples of a scene with different props. You can see with a side-by-side comparison that the visual language of these props are supporting the influence and tone of the show, along with the many other elements, including the shapes, colors, and lines. So why is prop design so important, especially when it comes to characters? The biggest reason is communication. The audience doesn't know who our character is, but giving them an appropriate prop will immediately communicate the information, elaborating on giving more context to who the character is and what they do. Let's say we want to design a knight. What would be some props we could use to communicate to our audience that this character is indeed a knight? We have a lot of different choices we can pull from, but we don't have to stop there, as we can choose from all kinds of props to suit our knight. We have shields, longswords, daggers, this. It all depends on what fits your character, but I am still going to stick with the most common weapon of choice, the sword. The point of a good design, whether it's for props, characters, or backgrounds, is not just about communication, but about solving a problem, where the solution is the idea that comes in the form of visual communication. For my prompt, I'm going to create a prop for my characters that's fitting, appealing, and cool. I'm starting with simple fantasy classes that most of us are already familiar with. I'm going to design a prop for a knight, mage, and a healer. These classes exist in a fantastical world where they all are part of a kingdom that worships the sun. Simple, yet this has obviously been done before. This shouldn't be a reason to stop you from exploring an idea though, even if you are designing for something that has already been done. Remember that you are the biggest influence that makes it different, so give it a try anyways, because chances are you may interpret something in a way that many others may not. Now that we have a clear direction on who we are creating a prop for, we can now take the first step to creating an effective prop for our characters, with research. Researching is incredibly important, as we need to make sure we are picking the appropriate choices for what we are trying to design. I like to break my research apart into two different phases, with the first one being to gather references. I split my references into two parts, one being the actual reference for research and understanding the object, and the other being more of an inspirational mood board. For the second part, I try to be more creative in applying what I've learned from the reference studies I gathered earlier, and start to mix in the prompt and mood board into a prop that I think will properly suit each character. But a word of caution about the mood board. Because we are analyzing other artists' work, we want to be mindful and don't want to unintentionally plagiarize when we are creating our designs, as the main purpose of this board is to evoke a similar mood and energy to our props. So make sure to keep that in mind. Once we've gathered our references for each of our props, in this case a sword for the knight, a staff for the mage, and a book for the healer, now we can actually start drawing. This is where we can finally start drawing examples of our props from the real world to really get a grasp on understanding our props as well as its components. Don't hesitate to take notes about these objects either, as it'll only strengthen your understanding and allow more flexibility when you start to design. Since these props aren't too complicated, I'll stick to anywhere from 5 to 10 studies, where I can still stay close to the reference and start to play around with the shapes and proportions. Once we've taken our notes and feel more confident in our studies and understanding of our subjects, we can now move to step 2, mood and theme. I briefly mentioned the mood board earlier, where it contains our inspiration, mood, and themes we are trying to portray in our props. But we start to run into a bit of a problem here. How do we take our references and apply these unique ideas and themes to our props without making them feel out of place? We can't just randomly slap the designs on the prop, so we need to have a strategy on how to do this. Let's take the sword from our knight. From the prompt I mentioned earlier, this knight is a part of a kingdom that worships the sun. We need to identify some of the patterns and motifs that can indicate the sun. And by the way, a motif is just a recurring theme to a central idea. This is where our mood board really comes in handy. So I'm going to make notes on how we can convey the sun and stick closely to those types of patterns. Since we are familiar with our objects from studying them earlier, we can start to play around with altering the different parts of our props with these shapes and designs to give us a new and fresh prop that is fitting for our fantasy classes. And now we are ready for the final stage of our epic prop designs: thumbnailing and designing. This is the stage where we can finally let loose with our explorations. Since we have gathered enough of an understanding with our prompt, studies, and theme we are trying to communicate. As we are sketching out our thumbnails, there are a few tips to keep in mind to make sure we are being intentional about our designs. The first tip, obviously, to be intentional. Try to remember the character and how they're related to the prompt. We don't want to stray away too much from our base design. Otherwise, the audience might get confused on what the prop is. With our knight's sword, we want to make sure it is still identifiable as a sword to make it belong to the knight. If it were to resemble another prop like a staff or book, it would become a little confusing to our audience. So we want to be intentional in maintaining that association between the knight and the sword so that we can be consistent with our designs and ideas. I continue to explore each of these designs with everything we have learned and are trying to implement. This brings me to the second tip, which is to play around with proportions. This is related to the big, medium, and small hierarchy when it comes to design. We want our designs to be visually interesting and appealing. When we don't balance our proportions, our props can either feel too generic or too busy. While there are plenty of examples that go towards these extremes, we still need to have a way to make sure we can make our prop interesting and unique without drifting too far away from our prompt or distracting from our character. The prop is there to complement the character, so try to arrange your shapes into big, medium, and small pieces. This will help guide and ensure that each of your props have enough visual appeal to make it pleasing to look at, as we tend to find this hierarchy very pleasant to the eye. Don't be afraid to push your proportions. Just see how far you can take your designs until they fit your vision. The last tip is to make sure you do not forget your story. This is why we had a prompt that gave us direction earlier. If I had just said that I wanted to make a knight, that's fine, but it leaves more to be desired. And this is part of why mindlessly copying references without adding any type of story can feel a bit boring and creatively empty when it comes to design. While going over good storytelling could be an entire video in and of itself, the main thing to remember is to make sure there is a proper visual connection between the prop and your character. Your story can also start from just one idea. It doesn't need to make sense on paper. Consistency in your design and cohesiveness with your prop, character, and world you want to establish all contribute to a strong foundation of storytelling. So start general and just work from there. You don't need to have everything figured out. The main thing to keep in mind while you're going through this process is, can you solve the problem through successfully communicating your design in a way that is visually appealing and cohesive to your story? This can help draw in the audience even more and help strengthen that connection in developing who your character is, and can make your character more memorable. And here are the final results for the prop designs of my characters. Honestly, if I had to give myself some feedback, I would probably refine these props a little bit more and try to appropriately render them out. Although I'm going for a very simple style, I do think I could probably add a little bit more personality to these props. And although this video wasn't focused on character design, I think I could use a little bit of work with finessing the designs and making them a little less busy. Overall, I'd say not bad. But what do you guys think? Which one is your favorite? Which one is your least favorite? Would you all like to see more tips like these? Or a part 2 of this video? Or about how I developed these characters? Let me know down in the comments. And for more art tips such as these, go ahead and design that subscribe button. Take care everyone, stay creative, and I'll see you next time.